The house was too quiet. After his father passed away, silence filled every corner. The walls that once echoed with laughter now only carried the ticking of an old clock. Each morning felt longer, each night colder. He would wake up, walk into the kitchen, and sit at the same wooden table where his father used to read the newspaper. But now the chair across from him was empty. The young man sat with his hands wrapped around a warm cup, steam rising gently. The sound of the spoon clinking against the ceramic cup seemed louder than it should. Outside, the morning light slipped through the curtains, soft and golden. But inside the house, the air felt heavy. He thought about how his father always kept the place alive. His footsteps had been strong, his voice steady, his presence enough to make everyone feel safe. Without him, the room seemed hollow. Even the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed lonely, as if the house itself missed its master. The boy's eyes wandered around the room. The family photographs were still on the wall, his father smiling in his work suit, a picture of them fishing by the river, another one of a family picnic long ago. The memories inside those frames felt like another life, a world that had ended the moment his father's heart stopped. The young man sighed, running his fingers along the table's edge. He tried to distract himself with small things, the sound of the kettle boiling, the soft rustle of pages from an old book, but nothing could hide the emptiness. And then, footsteps. They were light, careful, almost hesitant, but enough to pull him out of his thoughts. He looked up, and there she was, his stepmother. She entered the kitchen slowly, her hands brushing against the doorway as if steadying herself. Her face was pale, her eyes carrying the same tired grief that weighed on him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. There were no words, only silence thick enough to make the ticking clock sound louder. She gave him a small, fragile smile. "You're up early," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, almost comforting, though it trembled slightly. She walked over to the counter and reached for a cup, her movements careful as though she feared the glass might break in her hand. He nodded, trying to return her smile. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. His voice was rough, unused. The kettle whistled, breaking the silence. She poured hot water into her cup, the sound of it almost too loud in the quiet room. She sat across from him, the same place his father used to sit. That single act sent a sharp ache through his chest. For a while, they both sipped their drinks quietly. The smell of coffee filled the air, warm and earthy. Outside, a bird sang faintly, but inside, the silence pressed against them, like a heavy blanket. Finally, she spoke. "It feels strange, doesn't it? The house without him." He swallowed, forcing himself to answer. "Yeah, too quiet." Her eyes lowered to her cup. "Sometimes I think I'll hear him calling my name. Sometimes I think I'll see him walking in from the garden." Her words were soft, almost like a confession. "And then I remember." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she quickly lifted her cup to her lips as if hiding behind it. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded, his throat tight. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different. Less empty, more like shared pain. Two hearts carrying the same burden, two souls sitting in the same quiet house, missing the same man. He glanced at her. She looked tired, older than he remembered. The grief had changed her face, softened it in some ways, but hardened it in others. Her hair was slightly messy, her eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. Yet beneath it all there was still a warmth, a tenderness he couldn't ignore. She caught his gaze, and for a second, neither of them looked away. Something passed between them. Something unspoken. Something dangerous. He quickly looked down, at his cup, pretending to focus on the steam swirling upward. To break the tension, she whispered, "He would have wanted us to stay strong." He nodded again, though the words felt empty. Stay strong. How? The house itself seemed too heavy to live in. Every room reminded them of loss. Every sound reminded them of absence. Still, Her presence in that moment made the silence feel less cruel. They were both broken, but at least they weren't alone. The young man leaned back in his chair, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock, and the sound of her breathing across the table. He realized then that this was how it would be. Two lonely souls under the same roof, trying to survive the quiet together. But deep inside, he also felt something else. Something he didn't want to name. It was only the first morning without his father. Yet already the air between them carried a strange new weight. And as the clock ticked on, he couldn't help but wonder, what would happen next in this quiet house? The days after the funeral stretched long and heavy. The house no longer felt like home, only like a memory of one. Every corner carried silence, and every silence carried grief. He tried to busy himself with small tasks, watering the plants, cleaning old books, fixing little things that did not matter. But no matter what he did, the air inside the house stayed the same. Quiet, tense, unfinished. One evening, when the sky outside was dim and painted with the soft glow of sunset, he found himself sitting in the living room. The lamp in the corner cast a warm light, but it could not drive away the shadows that gathered near the walls. The clock ticked, slow and steady, like a heartbeat that would not stop, even when everything else had. He was staring at the carpet, lost in thought, when footsteps echoed from the hallway. He knew those steps now, the soft, measured pace of his stepmother. She walked into the room, her hands folded together, her eyes carrying something different this time. She paused near the doorway, as if deciding whether to step forward or not. Finally, she moved closer and sat on the sofa across from him. For a moment, she said nothing, her lips pressed together, her fingers restless, twisting a piece of fabric in her lap. He looked at her, waiting. There was a heaviness in her presence, as though she was carrying something too large to hold alone. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded, unsure what was coming. She lowered her gaze, staring at her hands. "Don't leave me." The words fell into the room like stones dropped into still water. The silence that followed was sharper than before. He blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Her breath caught. She looked up at him, her eyes glassy, but steady. "This house is too empty without him. Every sound reminds me of what I lost. I can't be here alone. Promise me you'll stay. Promise me you won't leave me alone in this place." He stared at her, his chest tightening. On the surface, it was a simple request: companionship, presence, family. But the way she said it carried something heavier, something unspoken. It wasn't only about loneliness, it was about closeness, about needing him in a way she didn't dare name. He swallowed hard. "Of course I'll stay," he said, though the words came out rough, uncertain. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly, as if she had been holding her breath. She gave him a small smile, but there was something hidden in it, something fragile, something almost dangerous. The lamp's light flickered gently, painting shadows across her face. He noticed how tired she looked, how her eyes seemed to hold both grief and a secret longing. For a moment, they sat in silence again. But this silence was different. Not the silence of grief, not the silence of loss. It was charged, thick, like the air before a storm. She leaned back into the sofa, her voice quiet. "Your father, he always told me we should take care of each other. He didn't want either of us to be alone." The words lingered between them. He nodded slowly, but his mind raced. Was this what his father had meant? Did taking care mean what she was suggesting now? Or was she twisting the memory to fit the emptiness inside her heart? He wanted to ask, but his throat closed. Instead, he only said, "I'll take care of you." The way she looked at him then made his chest ugh. Her eyes softened, warmed, but carried a spark he didn't understand, or maybe didn't want to understand. The kettle in the kitchen began to hum softly, the sound faint but steady. She stood up, smoothing her hands against her dress. "Tea?" she asked, her voice lighter now, as though nothing heavy had passed between them. He nodded. "Tea sounds good." As she moved toward the kitchen, he sat frozen, replaying her words in his head. "Don't leave me." The way she said it had pierced him deeper than anything else since his father's death. He heard the clink of cups, the pouring of hot water, the faint sigh she gave when steam rose against her face. She returned with 2 cups, placing one gently before him. Their fingers brushed when he reached for it, and again neither pulled away quickly enough. The warmth of the tea seeped into his hands, but it was not enough to distract him from the warmth of her presence. They drank slowly, quietly. The hum of the kettle faded, leaving only the ticking of the clock and the sound of their breathing. Every now and then her eyes lifted to meet his, and each time it felt harder to look away. She smiled faintly after a while. "It feels less lonely with you here." And he, though unsure of what was beginning to stir between them, found himself whispering back, "It feels less lonely with you too." The words were simple. The meaning was not. That night, as he lay awake in his room, her request echoed again and again in his head. "Don't leave me." It was more than a plea. It was the start of something neither of them had planned, something neither of them could control. In the quiet house, grief had built walls around them, but her words had opened a door he never expected. And he could not help but wonder what would happen if he walked through it. The nights grew longer after her request. He promised to stay, and he kept his word. But promises had weight, and this one felt heavier each day. The house remained quiet, yet the silence was no longer empty. It was shared. They moved through the same rooms, carried the same grief, and tried to breathe inside the same heavy air. 2 people tied together, not by blood but by loss. One afternoon, rain fell softly outside, tapping against the windows like a gentle drum. The world beyond the glass looked blurred and gray. He sat at the kitchen table with a notebook open, though he wasn't writing. His eyes drifted to the falling rain, his mind caught in memories of his father's laughter. She entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. The clink of porcelain on the table broke the stillness. "You should drink something warm," she said softly. He gave her a small nod, lifting the cup to his lips. The tea was bitter, but the warmth spread through his chest. He glanced at her, noticing the way her hands lingered around her own cup, holding it tightly as though it was the only thing keeping her steady. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of rain filling the room. And then, almost unexpectedly, she laughed. A small, broken laugh. He looked at her in surprise. "What's funny?" She shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Do you remember how your father used to hum when it rained?" He said the sound of rain was like music and he couldn't help but join in. The young man blinked, and then a smile spread across his face too. Yeah, he would hum the same tune every time. It wasn't even a real song, just his song. Her smile grew warmer, though her eyes glistened. "I miss that sound." They both chuckled quietly, the memory weaving between them like a fragile thread. For a moment, the heaviness in the room lifted, replaced by something softer, something almost sweet. She leaned back, gazing at the rain. "It feels strange, doesn't it? Laughing when he's gone." He nodded slowly. "It does, but maybe it's what he'd want." Their eyes met, and the silence that followed was not empty but full of shared memories, shared pain, and something neither of them dared to name. She broke the silence first, her voice low. "It's easier when you're here. I don't feel so lost." His heart tightened at her words. He wanted to say something, but his throat felt dry. Instead, he reached out, almost without thinking, and placed his hand gently over hers. She froze for a moment, staring at their hands, Her fingers trembled, then slowly relaxed beneath his. The warmth between them was quiet but powerful. It said more than words could. Neither pulled away. Outside, comma. The rain grew heavier, the sound rushing against the windows. Inside, time seemed to slow. He cleared his throat softly. I feel the same. It's less lonely when you're around. Her eyes lifted to his, and the look she gave him lingered too long. It wasn't the look of a stepmother. It wasn't the look of family. It was the look of someone who needed him, not just for comfort, but for closeness. She quickly looked away, her cheeks faintly flushed. She pulled her hand back, wrapping it tightly around her cup again. We should be careful, she whispered. The words carried warning but also longing. He nodded, though deep inside he wasn't sure he could be careful. Not anymore. The kettle whistled again in the kitchen, sharp and sudden, breaking the tension. She stood quickly, grateful for the excuse to move. But before she walked away, she paused and looked back at him. Her voice was soft, almost hidden beneath the rain. Thank you for staying. And then she was gone, leaving him staring at the space she left behind. That night he lay awake, listening to the sound of rain still tapping against the window. He thought of her smile, her laughter, the way her hand felt beneath his. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She was his stepmother. She was supposed to be untouchable, a boundary that could never be crossed. But grief had blurred the lines. Loneliness had brought them closer, and in that closeness something fragile, forbidden and dangerous was growing. As he closed his eyes, he realized the house no longer felt completely empty, but it also no longer felt safe. Because the loneliness they shared was slowly becoming something more. The days slipped into a quiet rhythm, but the air inside the house was changing. Grief was still there, heavy and constant, but something else was rising beneath it, something neither of them dared to name. It showed itself in small ways. The way her eyes lingered on him a little too long when he spoke, the way he noticed, the faint curve of her smile when she thought he wasn't looking, the way silence between them no longer felt empty, but filled with questions they never asked. One evening, the world outside was covered in soft rain again. The house glowed with warm light from the lamps, shadows stretching gently across the walls. He was sitting at the table, repairing an old book that had lost its spine. His hands worked carefully, though his mind wandered. She walked in quietly, carrying a folded blanket. You'll catch a chill sitting here so long, she said softly, placing the blanket across the back of his chair. He looked up, meeting her gaze. Thanks, he murmured, but his voice caught in his throat. Her face was close, closer than it should have been, and for a brief second he thought she might not step away. But she did. Slowly. She sat across from him, pouring herself a cup of tea. The faint sound of the spoon against porcelain echoed in the quiet. He watched the steam rise from her cup, swirling in the dim light, and suddenly he realized how aware he was of her. Every movement. Their eyes met. And neither looked away. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. His heart thudded in his chest, louder than the ticking clock on the wall. She shifted in her seat, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak but could not. Finally, she whispered, Do you ever feel like this house is trying to push us closer? He blinked, surprised by her words. What do you mean? She gave a small, nervous laugh. It's strange. Before, when your father was here, every room felt full. Now it feels like the walls are closing in. I can't breathe unless you're near. Her confession left him stunned. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His chest felt tight, his thoughts tangled. I know what you mean, he said at last, his voice low. It feels empty when you're not around. Her breath caught. The look in her eyes shifted, softer, but deeper, as if she was searching for something inside him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, almost By accident, her hand brushed against his on the table. The touch was small, barely anything, but it sent a shock through both of them. Her fingers lingered and his didn't move away. The sound of rain outside grew heavier, filling the silence between them. He felt his pulse in his throat, in his fingertips, in the small space where their hands almost rested together. She whispered again, her voice trembling. "We shouldn't," but the unfinished words hung in the air, trembling like a secret too dangerous to say aloud. He leaned closer without meaning to, his voice quiet, almost a confession. "I know." Their eyes locked, and for a second the world outside vanished. It was just the two of them, sitting in a house that no longer belonged to the past but to something new, fragile, and forbidden. The kettle in the kitchen began to whistle, sharp and sudden. She jumped slightly, pulling her hand back, her cheeks flushed. She stood quickly, muttering, "I'll get that." He sat frozen, his breath uneven. The moment had broken, but the weight of it remained, pressing hard against his chest. She returned with fresh tea, her movements slower now, more careful. She avoided his eyes as she set the cup before him, but the color in her cheeks betrayed her. They drank in silence, but the silence was no longer safe. Every glance, every brush of a hand, every breath seemed filled with something that could no longer be ignored. When she finally looked up again, her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Your father wanted us to care for each other. That's what," he said. He nodded, though he felt the meaning twisting inside him. "Yes, but this feels like something else." Her lips parted, but she didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She only lowered her gaze as though afraid of what would happen if she admitted the truth. The rain slowed outside, the sound softening to a gentle patter. Inside, the quiet returned, but it was no longer simple grief. It was something alive, restless, dangerous. That night as he lay in bed, he thought of the way her fingers had brushed against his. He thought of the look in her eyes, the silence that felt like an answer without words. He told himself nothing had happened. But deep inside he knew something had. Because the line between them was beginning to blur, and once blurred it would never be straight again. The nights were no longer silent. Even when the house was still, something lingered in the air, something unspoken, something alive. He felt it every time she walked past him, every time their eyes met, every time her voice trembled as if carrying a secret she could not say. One evening, the two of them sat by the fire in the living room. The rain had stopped outside, leaving behind a damp quiet. The flames crackled softly, filling the room with warmth and shadows. She had placed a blanket over her knees, her hands folded tightly together. He sat across from her, pretending to read an old book, though his eyes never truly left the page. His mind was elsewhere, caught on the way her presence made the silence feel heavy, on the way his chest tightened whenever she looked at him. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the fire gave sound, popping and sighing as if it too held secrets. At last, she broke the silence. Her voice was low, careful. "Your father, he always believed in love. Even when life was hard, he said love was what made it worth living." The young man looked up slowly, unsure where her words were leading. "Yes, he used to tell me that too." She smiled faintly, though sadness touched her eyes. "Sometimes I wonder what he would say now. To us. To this." Her voice faltered on the last word. She did not finish the thought, but the meaning hung in the air like smoke from the fire. He placed the book down, his fingers restless against the cover. "He would want us to be happy," he said, though his heart pounded at his own words. Her gaze lifted to his, searching, trembling. "But happiness can be complicated." The firelight flickered against her face, painting her features in gold and shadow. He saw the way her lips pressed together as if holding back words she longed to release. And then she whispered, "I'm lonely." The words hit him harder than he expected. They weren't just about grief. They weren't just about loss. They were about her. Her emptiness, her longing, her need for something more than memories. He swallowed, his throat tight. I know. I feel it too. Her eyes glistened and she leaned forward slightly. You don't understand. When I say lonely, I mean, I miss being seen. I miss being touched. I miss feeling alive. Her voice cracked, and she quickly looked down at her hands, ashamed of her own confession. His breath caught. The fire popped loudly, as if echoing her words. He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. I understand more than you think. Her eyes widened at his response. For a moment, neither moved. Then slowly, as if testing the weight of the moment, she reached across the small space between them. Her hand brushed against his, hesitant, trembling, but real. This time he didn't pull away. He turned his palm upward, letting her fingers rest inside his. The warmth of her skin against his made his chest ache. She closed her eyes, as if afraid of her own courage. We shouldn't, but I can't stop feeling this way. His voice shook as he answered, Neither can I. The room grew unbearably quiet, except for the fire crackling like a heartbeat. For a long time they sat there, hands joined, eyes avoiding what they both knew was true. Every second stretched, heavy with longing, heavy with guilt, heavy with a forbidden tenderness that neither could escape. At last she whispered, If your father could see us now. He tightened his grip gently, his voice steady but soft. Maybe he'd understand. Maybe he'd want us to heal, even if it looks different. Her lips trembled, her eyes filling with tears. She pulled her hand back suddenly, pressing it against her chest. No, this is wrong. It feels wrong. But it also feels... She stopped, shaking her head. It feels too much. Her words hung in the air like a secret neither of them could bury. The firelight flickered, throwing shadows across their faces. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything he was holding inside, but his voice refused to come. Instead, he sat, in silence, his heart racing, his mind replaying her confession again and again. She stood wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Her footsteps were soft as she walked toward the doorway. But before leaving, she turned back, her eyes meeting. Her voice was fragile, almost breaking. Promise me one thing. Promise you won't tell anyone about tonight. He nodded, unable to say anything else. She gave him a faint smile, one that carried both sorrow and relief. Then she disappeared into the hallway, her figure swallowed by the shadows. He sat alone by the fire, his hand still tingling where hers had rested. The flames cracked and sighed, filling the silence she left behind. He knew now there was no turning back. Because loneliness had spoken, and its voice was louder than grief. The house felt different after that night by the fire. Something had shifted between them, something silent but undeniable. They still moved through the same rooms, spoke about the same simple things. Tea, rain, the garden, the photographs on the wall, but beneath every word lived another meaning. The boundary between them was no longer clear. One evening, the air was heavy with summer storm clouds. The sky outside glowed faintly as thunder rumbled in the distance. He was in the kitchen washing the few dishes left from dinner when he felt her presence behind him. Let me help, she said softly. He turned, and for a moment, their eyes locked. She was close, too close, the kind of closeness that made his chest ache. He handed her a towel, their fingers brushing. The contact was small, but his heartbeat quickened all the same. They stood side by side, drying plates in silence. The sound of water dripping into the sink and the distant roll of thunder filled the air. Each time their hands moved too near, tension crackled stronger than the storm outside. Finally, she set the towel down, her hands trembling slightly. I can't keep pretending nothing's happening, she whispered. Dot. He froze, the plate in, his hands forgotten. What do you mean? Her eyes lifted to his, shining with a mixture of fear and longing. This, us, the way we look at each other, the way I feel when you're near. Her voice broke. I know it's wrong, but it doesn't feel wrong when I'm with you. His chest tightened, every breath heavy. He set the plate down and turned to face her fully. I feel it too. Every day. Every night. A flash of lightning lit up the window, followed by a sharp crack of thunder. The room seemed to tremble with their words. Dot. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. We can't let this go any further. But even as she said it, her body didn't move away. Her eyes lingered on his face, her breath uneven. Dot. He swallowed hard, his voice low. Then why does it feel like we already crossed that line? For a long moment the world stilled. The only sound was the storm outside and the steady beat of their hearts. Dot. And then, without planning it, without thinking it through, their hands found each other, fingers intertwined, palms pressing, the warmth of skin against skin carrying more weight than words. Dot. She gasped softly, as if the touch shocked her. We shouldn't. But she didn't let go. Dot. He stepped closer, so close, that the faint scent of her perfume reached him, a mix of something floral and warm. His voice trembled. I don't want to stop. Her lips parted, her breath quick. For a heartbeat it felt like the whole house leaned into their closeness. Dot. Then she pulled her hand away suddenly, pressing it against her chest. No. If we don't stop now, we never will. He took a step back, pain flashing across his face. And if we stop, what happens to us? We'll just keep pretending until it breaks us? She turned away, her shoulders trembling. The storm outside grew louder, rain beginning to patter against the windows. Dot. He stood there, torn between guilt and desire, between the memory of his father and the reality of what was happening. Dot. She finally spoke, her voice soft but sharp. If your father were here. He cut her off gently, his tone steady. He's not, and we're still here. Her breath caught, her eyes closing as though the words pierced her. Slowly she turned back to him, her face pale, her eyes wet with tears she didn't let fall. Dot. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The tension was unbearable, like the pause before lightning strikes. Dot. And then, she whispered the words that broke the last piece of distance. Stay with me tonight, just don't leave me alone. The words carried no explanation, but they didn't need one. Dot. His heart pounded in his chest. He nodded, unable to say anything else. Dot. That night, the line between them blurred completely. Not with loud declarations or reckless words, but with quiet closeness. With touches too tender to name. With silences filled by things they couldn't bring themselves to say. Dot. The storm outside raged on, lightning flashing, thunder rolling, rain hammering against the windows. But inside, the world was reduced to the space between them, the fragile warmth they found in each other's arms, the dangerous comfort they couldn't let go of. Dot. When morning came, the storm was gone, leaving behind the soft brightness of a washed sky. She sat at the table, a cup of coffee in her hands, her eyes distant. He joined her quietly, their silence deep, but different now. No longer heavy with grief, but with something else. Dot. She looked at him, her lips trembling as she whispered, We crossed it. He nodded slowly. Yes. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. And now, we can't go back. The truth hung between them, fragile and final. Dot. The line was gone. The storm had passed. Dot. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and pale, touching the corners of the room with quiet gentleness. But inside the house, silence hung thicker than before. It was not the silence of grief alone anymore. It was something else, something that carried the weight of what had happened between them. Dot. He sat at the kitchen table, his fingers curled loosely around a cup of coffee. The steam rose in slow spirals, vanishing into the still air. His eyes were distant, fixed on nothing. Replaying the night over and over in his mind, her footsteps echoed softly down the hallway. He didn't need to turn. He already knew it was her. She entered the room, dressed simply, her hair tied back, her face pale with the exhaustion of a sleepless night. She moved carefully, as if afraid any sudden step might break the fragile quiet between them. She poured herself a cup of coffee, her hand steady, though her breathing was not. Sitting across from him, she lifted the cup to her lips but did not drink. Instead, she stared into the dark liquid, as if the answers she needed might appear there. For a while, neither spoke. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, the only sound in the room besides the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was soft, trembling but firm. "We crossed it." He nodded slowly, his throat dry. "Yes." Her eyes lifted to his, glistening with something she tried to hide. "And now we can't go back." The words settled between them like stones, heavy, unmoving. He wanted to speak, to tell her he didn't regret it, that the night had given him a sense of closeness he hadn't felt since before his father died, but the words stayed trapped inside, tangled between guilt and longing. She looked away, her hands tightening around the coffee cup. "I don't know what this makes us," she whispered. "I don't know if it makes us stronger or weaker." He leaned forward, his voice low. "It makes us human." Her lips parted, but she did not answer. The silence stretched again, filled with unspoken feelings. After a long pause, she set her cup down and reached across the table. Her fingers brushed his, light as a feather, hesitant, almost afraid. But the touch lingered. He turned his hand upward, letting her fingers rest in his palm. The warmth was familiar now, but no less dangerous. She gave a faint, broken smile. "Last night, and it felt like more than comfort. It felt like something I've been missing for so long." His chest ached at her words. "Me too." The truth of it was undeniable. They were both lost, both broken, and in each other they had found a refuge, one that blurred every line of family, morality, and love. Her eyes softened, but sadness weighed them down. "We can't live in that moment forever." He swallowed hard. "No. But maybe we don't have to forget it either." The clock ticked again, louder somehow, filling the gap where words failed. She pulled her hand back gently, folding it into her lap. "If anyone knew." Her voice trailed off, but the fear was clear. The world outside their walls would never understand. He nodded. "No one will know. This stays with us." Her eyes searched his as if testing the truth in his promise. At last, she gave a small nod. "Thank you." For the rest of the morning, they sat together in fragile quiet, sipping coffee, avoiding the weight of what had changed. The normal routine felt strange now, as though the house itself knew their secret. Every creak in the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the window seemed sharper, louder, as if the silence was no longer neutral, but watching. When she finally stood, she walked to the sink, rinsed her cup, and set it down with careful hands. She turned back to him, her expression calm, but her eyes full of things she did not say. "Take care of yourself today," she whispered. He nodded, his voice low. "You too." She lingered at the doorway for a moment, as if wanting to say more. Then she walked away, her footsteps fading into the hallway. He sat alone again, staring at the empty chair across from him, the same chair where his father used to sit, the same chair where she had sat last night. The afterglow of silence wrapped around him, heavy but warm, guilty but comforting. He knew nothing would ever be the same again. The house had once been filled with grief. Now it was filled with something far more complicated. And though the storm had passed, another one was surely waiting. The days that followed felt heavier, not lighter. The closeness they had shared remained, but it lived in the silence, in the glances in the way their hands almost touched but pulled away at the last second. The house seemed to breathe with their secret. Every room carried the memory of what had happened. Every corner whispered with unspoken truth. Yet neither of them dared to name it aloud. One morning, he stood by the window, looking at the garden outside. The flowers his father once planted had grown wild, stretching in uneven patches. The air smelled of earth and dew, the kind of freshness that usually brought peace. But today it only reminded him of how tangled his heart had become. Behind him, he heard her footsteps. Slow, careful. When he turned, she was there, dressed in a pale sweater, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. Her eyes met his, soft, but steady. "We can't go on like this," she said quietly. His chest tightened. He had expected these words, but hearing them still cut deep. "I know." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "If we stay here together, if we keep living in this house with these walls and this silence, I will drown. What we did, it will eat us alive." He wanted to argue, to say that they could survive it, that their bond was stronger than fear. But deep inside he knew she was right. Every day would become heavier. Every glance would carry guilt. Every silence would demand more than they could give. "So what do we do?" he asked softly. She hesitated, her eyes glistening. "You leave. Start again somewhere else. You're young. You still have a future. This house is my prison, but it doesn't have to be yours." His throat closed. The thought of leaving her here alone felt unbearable. "And you? What about you?" Her lips trembled, but she smiled faintly. "I'll live with the memory. It's all I can do." He shook his head, his voice breaking. "I don't want to be just a memory." She reached for him then, her hand brushing his cheek, her touch tender and trembling. "You'll be more than that. You already are." For a long moment they stood like that, caught between holding on and letting go. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, the soft sigh of wind through the window, all of it pressed in around them, making the moment feel endless. Finally, she whispered, "If we keep this, it will destroy us. But if we let it go, maybe it will save us." Tears burned in his eyes, though he fought them back. "I don't want to lose you." "You're not losing me," she said gently. "You're just setting me where I belong, in your heart, not in your arms." Her words felt like both a wound and a gift. The rest of the morning passed in slow silence. He packed a small bag, each fold of clothing feeling like a piece of his soul being tucked away. She busied herself in the kitchen, her movements careful, avoiding the moment when their eyes would meet again. When he was ready, he stood by the doorway. His bag rested at his feet. She stood across from him, her arms folded tightly as if holding herself together. Neither spoke at first. The silence said enough. Finally, he broke it. "Thank you. For everything." Her smile was faint, fragile. "Thank you for staying when I needed you most." They stepped closer. For one last time her hand found his, their fingers interlocking with a desperate tenderness. They held on as though letting go would break them both. She whispered, her voice trembling, "I'll always remember." He pressed his forehead gently against hers, his voice low. "So will I." And then, with all the courage he could gather, he pulled away. He lifted his bag, opened the door, and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, fresh, alive. Behind him, the sound of her footsteps stayed inside the house. The door clicked shut softly. He stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet. The world outside moved on. Birds calling, wind rustling through leaves, the distant hum of life, returning. But inside him, the echo of her voice, her touch, her presence would never fade. As he walked down the path, he felt both broken and whole. Broken because of what he was leaving behind. Whole because he knew their bond, though forbidden, had given him something real, something he would carry forever. Some stories don't end with forever. Some end with a goodbye that tastes both bitter and sweet. And in the quiet of that morning, he learned that love in any form always leaves its mark.